so up above the officer would have been in this caged area, and he would have lowered the key to the officer on the ground floor. And then he would have unlocked this door by placing this big brass key inside the box. We've got the mechanism to operate. Hi, my name is John Cantwell. I'm a National Park Ranger on Alcatraz Island. I interpret the history for the general public, and I love to operate these doors and demonstrate the slammer. These doors were placed on the island in 1934 by Stewart Decatur Company to lock up the worst of the worst criminals on Alcatraz Island. And for 29 years, the Federal Bureau of Prisons used these doors to incarcerate the worst of the worst criminals. By 1963, the island was shut down, it served its purpose, and it sat vacant for many years. The National Park Service took over Alcatraz in 1973, and we started operating tours for the general public and actually demonstrating these doors and even locking the visitor up in the door for the experience. But by the 1990s, over the years of slamming these doors and demonstrating to the general public, the doors were starting to jam on us. We even had visitors locked up in these cells, and the parts that we needed to keep the doors operating were stolen from the upper floors of the cell house to keep the ground floor operating. And by 2006, we only had a couple ranges actually operating. I looked at the cell doors and decided to contact a company out of San Antonio, Texas, Southern Folger Detention Company, the largest manufacturer of cell door mechanisms, to look at our doors and see if restoration was possible. $20,000 was paid to this company through funding through the National Parks Conservancy to re-grease the doors and do an inventory of the parts that were missing. CEO Don Halloran came to Alcatraz in 2006 to see the job. I gave him a tour, and after that tour, he contacted me and said, from now on, it's going to be free of charge. Southern Folger will do the restoration work and rehab these doors and put the slam back in the slammer. Don Halloran contacted two local companies in the Bay Area, Scandex Springs in San Leandro, California, and Paragon Machine Works in Richmond, California, to partner with Southern Folger to do the rehab of the cell door parts. Let's go to these companies and see how they assisted the National Park Service in putting the slam back in the slammer. We're here in San Leandro, and we're going to do a tour of the Scandex Spring Company and actually see the parts being constructed, drawn out, the whole process. Let's go in and get a tour with Rich Moore. Fantastic. So can you tell us what you've done so far with this restoration?
Oh yeah, sure. Basically what it started out with was originally a tour. You guys had us come out to Alcatraz and gave us a behind the scenes, so we got to see some things that normally most people, besides yourselves, get to see. And you guys had all the parts laid out for us. Southern Folger had originally dismantled several of the cells and laid them out so we knew what parts we were going to get involved with. And what we did is we took those parts back here to Scandic, and we figured out we had a list of how many parts you guys needed. And what we did is we looked at it, assessed it, and began to measure and make drawings, because we had to make drawings of each of the parts that were made. Other than the patent drawings, there are no drawings, manufacturing drawings. So what we had to do was model those parts, and we used some of the new technology today, the new 3D CAD software, to actually model the parts in the computer. And from there, the parts were broken down into manufacturing drawings, where they would go out to the shop to be manufactured. And then once I actually create a drawing just for this piece, I send a file out to the water jet machine that will actually cut this out.
All right, John, so what we've got here, this is an Omax water jet machine, and it basically uses high pressure water, and the water, this machine has a capacity of spraying about 50,000 pounds per square inch. We're not using that much pressure right now, but That's what its capacity is, so we can cut thicker pieces of material. We're cutting a 1/4 inch 4140 steel right now, and we use a water and a garnet abrasive, and that garnet abrasive is pulled in by vacuum by a venturi into the pressure stream, and it's a mixture of high pressure water and garnet that cuts the material.
See the hole set. There's a slug line from the hole.
Wow.
There you have it.
That's amazing. That's great. Next, we go to the Paragon Machine Shop to see how they contributed in the restoration project. Hi, folks. We're here in Richmond, California at the Paragon Machine Works, and I'd like to introduce you to Mark Norstead, and he's been involved with reproducing some of the historic parts for the Alcatraz cell door mechanism. So, if you could just give us a little a visual, Mark.
Yeah, here's what we got from Alcatraz. These are the original door hardware that were installed, I guess, when the federal government took over the prison. And I guess there's some of these missing or broken, so we've been asked to reproduce this. And we don't have a formal drawing or a print on this, so what we're going to do is take the measurements off these existing parts and essentially reverse engineer them so that we can go ahead and reproduce them. This particular part, there's two versions, and of those two versions, there's a right and a left-hand version of each one. So there's 4 distinct parts that we've got to manufacture out of this thing. So we started out by taking measurements, as precise measurements as we could on this thing, and trying to figure out which of those measurements are the important ones. You know, some aren't important, some are. You know, this spacing in here, this is something that's important. This little piece added on, that's a hardened steel thing, that's important. I'm not quite sure what it does, but we're going to make sure that we get it right. So once we figure that out, just with some raw data and dimensions, we're going to put it on a computer here, and it's a CAD system. So here we see on the monitor is a drawing we made of these parts after we took our measurements and tried to reproduce it. You can see on the top of the monitor, this sort of T-shape is the same T-shape we've got here, and we're going to put 2 pieces on this one piece of material to maximize our yield, and then all the little leftovers we're going to utilize that material as well to continue making all the other hardware it's going to take to make this part. So this is sort of the first step towards more modern manufacturing.
Mark, can you tell us what is this material that we're using here? First off, this is a blank, I guess.
Right. Yeah. This is a blank. This is steel. It's 4140 steel. It can be heat treated to be harder than a normal steel, so you have a good high quality piece when you're done. So this comes in a 12-foot bar, and we just cut it like this, and it's been sent out to be heat treated already to be stress relieved, so it doesn't warp when we machine it. So that's what we start with. After it goes through this machine here, the actual milling machine, it'll come out of here with a series of holes in it and some of the features machined on it. And then we're going to use some of these features that we put on here to locate this and bolt it down back into the machine on what we call a tooling plate or a fixture. And that's this here. And we've got little features on here that are going to locate, notably these little dowel pins that fit in holes. And we'll put the part back in the machine, and we'll essentially cut out the profile. And here are those same T-shapes we saw earlier. Let me find a matched set. So there's a matched pair that have come out of that blank, and then from in between we've got these little other blocks that would normally be waste and a lot of other things. We're able to make stuff out of it. And that's pretty much the process down here. There will be other machines that we've got to use. We'll have to use a CNC lathe to make the rollers on there. We use a saw to cut the longer bars and put the slots in that, and then finally weld some of the features on and bolt them down to this. But
are you making the roller bars here?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we're doing them right here. So what we're going to do here, we're going to put the threads in the holes, and what you see right there is a tool called a tap, and you'll also see a bunch of coolant going all over the place. That's what we use to lubricate it with. So this is a stop in the program just to make sure that the features we want on the plate are there, and they're actually there. So here we go. And there's the coolant coming out of there, and Normally we keep the door closed, but that's putting the thread in, it stops, and it actually backs the tool out of there. Get in there, John, you want to take a look at it. So it's just doing its thing.
Pretty quiet.
Yeah, it is. It is really quiet. For some of the larger cuts and the roughing cuts, it'll make a lot more noise. I mean, it's really...
Well, now when we were at Scandeck, they showed us that it was a bead of water and then sand material cutting through.
Right,
so
exactly.
This is just a bit, basically? Or?
Yeah, that particular bit is a tap that's putting threads in there.
Okay.
But we have plenty of other bits. Let me just grab one from right up here. Here's a typical other bit. This is an end mill, and that's an actual cutting tool. It's essentially a very fancy, expensive router bit is all it is. And that'll actually cut out the profiles here. So it's just going to go around and do all the holes and switch to another tap, a slightly larger one for some of the other features.
Impressive.
After the machine work, here's what we have is a almost finished product coming off the machine, and we'll put all the parts in this and get it out to Alcatraz.
Fantastic. The individual parts were then shipped to Southern Folger for final assembly. Once this was completed, it was time for the final installation. This was accomplished over several visits to the island. Members from Southern Folger San Antonio's office, along with their local field crew, assisted in the project, making this a team effort. The installation of the parts was not a simple task. Some final fitting and customization was required. In some cases, the parts were repaired rather than replaced.
Well, here's an example here. This one, this is the all release is functioning, but on the down tiers, we'll have to replace the individual release that's missing. These are broke off on a couple of them. We're going to weld them back on when there's no tourists out here.
Over the years, the settling of the cell house building presented some problems, as Joe Tate explains.
Well, what we have found, though, is on the lower tiers where the columns have shifted, where these parts right here, the spring plungers actuate, they put the shifting of the columns has put that in a bind, and we've had to shim them out and either move them up or down to get them to actually function because of the shifting of the building.
Work continued until all 336 cells of B and C block were operational. It's kind of funny, Al Capone's cell resisted repair until the final stages of the restoration project, but we got it. Some of the newly replaced parts were engraved for the purpose of future identification. One of the final steps of this effort was the replacement of the missing instruction plaques located inside the gang box doors. These were reproduced by incorporating the same labor-intensive acid-etched method used in making the originals. Once work was completed, it was time to take these restored cell door mechanisms for a spin. Okay, Dave, so here is the box that operates these cell doors. And we've been calling it the gang box. I've heard that from locksmiths before. What other terminology would you call this? You've called this...
It can be called any number of things in a manual release cabinet because everything in here allows you to manually release the doors. Emergency release, or bar box.
Bar box.
Or the box.
Or gang box.
Gang box.
It all works. The officer would lower the key to the officer on the floor, and then he would go to the lock box, the gang box, and unlock the door. And inside, you've got the mechanism.
Yes.
This is the selector arm. You depress the button, which is spring-loaded. You move it till you find the position that you're looking for. It has an arrow that goes up and down and matches up with numbers that correlate with the doors out on the cell line.
Now this has got 1 to 14.
Yes.
And then there's an A on the bottom. What's that mean?
All. That's
Oh, okay.
if you choose to pick up all the doors on the whole cell line.
Right, okay. So if we wanted to open up one cell,
You'd go to select number 8, number 7.
lucky 7.
Lucky number 7.
Okay.
You then grab the clutch, which has a spring-loaded trigger.
And keep that trigger depressed at all times, right? Push it back in?
The way the handle and the trigger is made, where the trigger is located, you automatically depress it just by pulling the lever.
Okay.
So it's can't miss.
Okay.
Push it back in. Then you grab the door operating arm. Pull it down.
Hey, number 8, number 7 opened up. Easy peasy.
Then, if you're getting ready to close the bar box back up, you go back up to all release, which lets the handle go in as far as it possibly physically can with the mechanism.
And that's really important, right? Because if you don't do that, it's going to bind the door.
Then your door will bottom out on the handle.
Right.
The handle's out here, the door can't close. So you push the handle back up to get all the clearance you can. You take your clutch, you depress it slightly, and inside there's a deadlock feature. You raise that up slightly, and you push the clutch arm in a little bit more.
And that has to go all the way back.
Yes. And by doing that, it lets this arm go in far enough so that when you close the door, it doesn't keep the door from closing.
Got it.
That was a feature they had initially during the original installation and usage, so that the guard or whoever, the guard, got busy, was preoccupied, or forgot to kick that up and put it into the deadlock feature. If he forgot to put it into that deadlock feature, this stuck out far enough so that he couldn't close the door and get it locked. So it was kind of a safety mechanism.
That works for me. But that is very important. That's got to be seated all the way back.
Otherwise, this will bottom out on the door and damage the plaques.
Yeah, that's right. There's an instruction plaque inside the box here, so if the officer forgets, he can look up on that door.
Then you close the door, reverse the position of the key.
And away you go.
That's it.
Excellent, Dave. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now that you've seen the doors operate, let's go behind this box and see how the mechanism works. So David, we have the cover on the cell door mechanism, and there was a security bar that would lock this cover from the gang box so that you could not remove this cover. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is. If someone were to get the screw out, they could not take this splice off, which would in turn not let them get the cover off, so they could get up in there and manually open the door or go down and do the same to let other individuals out. You come in, you remove the screw for maintenance, take the screw out, you put this bar in the right position, which is operated at the bar box. You take the splice off, and the way this worked, this lug goes through this notch, and when it goes in there, this bar has a slot in it. It's slid to the position where everything can go in there. When you go back the other way, it locks it where even with the screw out, it can't come off. So once you go through that process and remove that,
Then you're ready to take the cover off.
yes, you are.
Okay. This cover weighs about what? About 30 pounds? Good?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, Dave, so we've got the cover off. Here's the guts to the cell door mechanism. Walk me through this. Let me know exactly what's going on when I'm looking up at all these moving parts.
Okay, John, what we'll do is we'll go through the function and give a little description as to what's happening.
Okay?
Okay, I'm going to have the guy down at the MRC cabinet select the door to begin with. John, select number 5. Okay, now I'm going to have him clutch the door. Clutch number 5. As he clutched number 5, first of all, we selected number 5. Then as we clutched it, it moves the master bar, which raises the lock bar, which then allows the door to fall into a position where it can be opened or closed if it's just a reverse operation. John, open it. Okay, stop right there. As he came down with the first half of the stroke of the handle, the selector bar moves across, and when it gets to the right position, these flippers drop down and they drop over and catch this hammer. John, open the door. Now as he moves that, it takes the door to the open position. When it gets to the full end of the stroke, the hammer drops down so the door is no longer engaged with the bar up above. Clutch it, John. Between every function, whether you're opening or closing the door, you want to operate the clutch. That puts everything in neutral to let you start a new cycle. Close it, John. The door traveled. It picked it up again with the hammer. The flippers picked up the hammer on the door, and as he started the stroke of the handle, it moved the selector bar, which then carried the door down. When it got to a closed position, the lock bar then dropped down, and it's now secured.
So there's no way of getting out. This even if they got the box off, that's still secure.
Once it's to this point and the lock bar is down, they're there.
Fascinating. The Alcatraz cell door restoration project took over 3 years with an estimated cost of $340,000. Numerous people volunteered their services in order to make this effort a reality. Special thanks goes out to Southern Folger CEO Don Halloran. Without his generosity and passion to help preserve Alcatraz's unique history, this undertaking would not have been possible. As the voices of Alcatraz's inmates and correctional officers begin to fade over time, the sound of the slammer will continue to speak volumes to Alcatraz visitors for years to come. All right, here we go. Rack 'em. 10. And folks, that is the slammer.